Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Cheyenne Boyce, and welcome to our session today where we will be discussing pathways to success through technology and workforce initiatives. So we're very excited. Like we were just saying, I don't know about you guys. Hopefully everyone was able to catch Heather McGee in her opening keynote, but I know that I'm fired up and ready to continue, just learning and sharing with this community over the next 2 days of this conference. So welcome and thank you all so much for being here. A bit about myself really quickly. I currently serve as the Strategic Partnerships Manager for the Education Partner Program at Hubspot. And I was particularly excited to be joining this panel today for a couple of reasons. First, in my role, I have the amazing opportunity to work with professors at HBCUs, HSIs, and other minority serving institutions to help bring HubSpot software and applied learning opportunities into the classroom. And so through my work, I see the desire that professors have to really decrease the skills gaps that exist and make sure that their students are able to hit the ground running and remain competitive, especially in the technology sector. So it was so great to know that this topic was going to be included in this year's conference. The second reason that I was excited is because although we know that there is still so much work to be done in the area of education and diversity in our modern workforce, I am joined today by a group of panelists who are champions for workplace inclusion, advocates for diverse workforce representation, and leaders who recognize the value of bridging the digital divide in order to achieve equity in education and economic development in our communities. So while, like I said, we know that there's a lot of work to be done and the work is not easy, I think that our conversation today is going to be great in terms of acknowledging where we are and then also really thinking about where we still need to go. So with that, I would love to get us started with a quick round of introductions. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to share a bit about who they are, what they do, and give us some brief background on what led you all to serve as diversity and inclusion advocates in the workforce development space specifically. So Cynthia, would you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here. Everybody, thanks for using the chat. I kind of like meeting setups because I get to see faces and everything, but it's good that we have this chat because I can kind of get a sense of what you're thinking if you just put, feedback in the chat for us. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Cynthia Overton. I am the Director of Tech Workplace Initiatives at the Kapor Center. We are a racial justice organization dedicated to leveling the playing field in tech. We operate across what we call a leaky tech pipeline, looking at leaks in the pipeline in the K through 12 environment, in the higher education setting, in the workforce, which is my area, and then in entrepreneurship. I operate 2 online professional communities, learning communities. One is called Diversity Advocates. We are a group of D&I practitioners dedicated to inclusion in the tech industry. And then there's also our collective, which really focuses on people who are advancing diversity and inclusion, specifically for Black and Latinx talent through employee resource groups. So what brought me to this work? I mean, I think that like so many other people on this panel, probably people who are listening in, I would say, really the need, the desire to thrive and survive, as a child, I think that, I didn't have very much agency. I couldn't really put words to express how I felt like I was being treated, all the way from kindergarten even, through my most highest degree. I'll just tell you, starting off, in elementary school, I remember being called the N-word. I remember teachers really treating me like I was almost an inconvenience. I remember just last year, 2 years ago, I was at home and my mother had a report card and it was from the 5th grade. And I noticed that one of my teachers, Mrs. Stallnecker, and I still remember her, I was 10 years old, this was 40 years ago, she gave me an A in my grade and a C in effort. How does a 10-year-old master content and get a C for effort? At the time, I didn't realize what was going on. Is it, 10-year-olds don't understand this. Now reflecting back as an adult, I certainly understand, you know, as everybody probably on this call has experienced, been followed in stores. I remember when I was going to get my regalia for my ceremony when I graduated with a doctorate degree from University of Michigan, which actually was a good experience for me. But remember being in the bookstore to pick it up, and there were only two people in line, me and another guy who was Black. And the person came out and says, I understand that there's somebody here who needs their regalia. What happened to them? And I was standing right in front of him. So just this whole idea of low expectations and these preconceived notions that, again, many of the people who are involved in this conversation have experienced throughout their life. So once I got to the workplace, you know, I'm thinking I have the highest degree that I can get. I've already proven myself. This is going to be my chance to shine. And I experienced the same type of treatment. Paid less money, fewer access, fewer opportunities to excel, slower to promotion. And I mean, it wasn't just me, it was all the other Black folks who were in this environment as well. So with me, I got into this work just because I had a desire to be treated as an equal human being. I started at that workplace, started mobilizing internally, and that's how it all began for me. This was about 10 or 15 years ago. I'm obviously no longer there. So that's me.
So much for sharing, Cynthia. I know those are experiences that too many of us can resonate with. So no, thank you so much. Kayla, do you want to take it next?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kayla Mikel. I'm the co-founder and president of PeduL. According to Viacom CBS, their words, not mine, we are kind of like the #1 diversity hack for corporations to diversify their workforce through scholarship programs. So what that means is corporations can't necessarily post a job listing saying that they're looking for, let's say, like a Latinx engineering intern or a Black woman data science intern, right? But they can post a scholarship on PeduL for that exact candidate profile. So now companies kind of have the autonomy to say who they want to engage with, what do they look like, where do they come from, experiences, both inherent and acquired. And we can get even as granular as, you know, helping a company get in front of Black women computer engineering students who are undergraduate seniors from Oakland, California, who are left-handed, if they want to get that granular. So my co-founder and I started PeduL out of our dorm room at Rutgers University here in New Jersey, largely out of just the frustration that most of our friends were dropping out of school, not because they didn't deserve to be there or that they didn't earn their place, but simply because they couldn't afford it. So for the last 4 years, we actually have been solely just a scholarship marketplace. But my story is really kind of woven into the fabric of the company. I was supposed to go to NYU. It was my dream school. Thank God I didn't, or I wouldn't be here today. But I would have graduated from NYU with over probably $170,000 in debt, I think it was. So, you know, I was kind of stripped of an opportunity because of money and not because of my intelligence, my competencies, or my capabilities. So PeduL really is a product of living through a world where a college degree, I think, in my opinion, has shifted from something that was easily accessible and was a commodity to now a kind of necessary luxury. So for the last 4 years, we've helped students across the country earn over $4 million worth of scholarships. And now we've kind of evolved to pair corporate engagement and professional development into the life cycle of our user experience so that one day we can look back and say that, you know, PeduL was responsible for helping some corporations recruit and source to reflect the changing face and the diversifying face of the modern workforce.
I just love hearing more and more about your story every time because it's created, you found you were able to create a pathway that's been so successful for so. It's really, really amazing. Thank you. Let's see, Kathy, can we jump to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And your energy is contagious. Thanks, Kayla. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm very honored to be here with these really esteemed and exciting panelists. I am joining you from the Ohlone territory in Oakland, California. My name is Crumpy. I am the COO of Future State and recently acquired by Accenture. Future State is a human-centered transformation consulting firm that focuses at the people at the heart of change. I've been with this company for 17 out of 20 plus years career, and we have grown here in the East Bay. And one of the things that's really important to me and our company is how do we create a more diverse company, and how can we pilot some of the changes that need to be done in a smaller company. And now we're at Accenture, and I'm excited to see how do we do this at scale to really create impactful, meaningful work for more people, particularly people of color, particularly people in underserved communities, and closing that opportunity gap. So closing that opportunity gap is something that's really personally important to me, and that's what brings me here to share about some of the things that we've done and that we're now doing at Accenture. So thank you all for having me today.
Absolutely. And as someone who's also interested in like organizational development and behavior, I'm just fascinated by the work that I've seen, that I've read that you've been doing. And yes, certainly last but least, Saira, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Great to meet the panelists for the first time. Thank you, Cheyenne, for kicking us off. So I won't take us too much time since I know we want to cover a few questions, but a little bit about myself. My name is Saira Pasha. I'm a California area manager in external and regulatory affairs for AT&T in San Francisco. And then I'm also the founder of the Initiative. It's a coaching hub based in Oakland where we offer executive business and life coaching services to community members and organizations. Professionally, I observed a pattern and a gap in our systems when I was in corporations for the past 10, 15 years. And when you're in decision-making roles and you start to see patterns and gaps of who is in charge and who is leading it, you start to understand how important, how urgent and active, diverse voices are needed to be arched in those decision-making roles and in those decision-making situations. So I wasn't too settled in with that after some time when I was in a leadership position, plus in a decision-making role where I was like, I want more people who come from various backgrounds and who can bring their personal stories and narratives when we are making decisions. I've mostly worked for medium to large size companies, and so it stems from professional experiences. And personally, when you're in an identity of being in an influencing position, change, and anytime you're in these influencing roles you have, I think of this identity of like, I want to lead not by my title, but my values and my identity. And so I think I knew that for the past few years that I wanted to shift that and change that about myself in work and personally. So I wanted to take more accountability and take action steps towards it. So I'm leading by example, by my identity and by my values of wanting to be a social change agent for bringing more and more equity, diversity, and inclusion in workforces, as well as in our communities, since we're seeing a big disruption that happened back in June 2020. So that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you for sharing, and it's so wonderful that all of us have had different background experiences, but have still all come together to the same place to be able to talk about this work that we're all working on collectively. So thank you so much, everyone watching. I hope that was I think that was a really great introduction to learn the diverse backgrounds of all of our panelists. So thank you again for sharing. So in order to think about our future, I think that we first have to know where we are. So as we think about current challenges and barriers that we experience in this space, what do you all think employers need to prioritize in their initiatives to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion for our modern workspace? And you all can feel free to jump in as you see fit.
Yeah, I to speak to anyone in the room who specifically works in talent, because that's really the space that I play in, hiring managers, heads of talent acquisition, even campus recruiters. I mean, I think we've seen over the last probably year now, right, just how many corporations can find time to push a press release, right, without pairing it with actionable plans. And we see how swift a lot of these companies are to invest in, you know, hiring a face of diversity and filling a checkbox leadership position, yet they seldom invest in the journey that's required to achieve that kind of mobility within the organization, right? Like when you see CEOs like Charles Schwab of Wells Fargo saying, I can't find diverse talent for my boardroom because of the lack of qualified diverse talent, right? And so we have to start to have a real conversation and real discourse around the clear discrimination that I see, right, that happens at the entry level, the lack of championship that's often required to navigate and successfully climb the corporate ladder, right? And we can't also ignore, and this might be a hot take, but we can't ignore that talent acquisition managers historically in this country have been the gatekeepers of systemic oppression and white supremacy. So we have to really identify that, right? Assign a name to those agents of oppression, and then we could start to figure out what are the channels and the tools to kind of dismantle the power that they yield, right? And it comes down to ownership. So for those in talent in particular, I just implore you to really get honest with yourself, to kind of acknowledge your own unconscious bias, because we all have them, right? It's just a matter of being honest with ourselves and figuring out whether or not we want to admit it, actively kind of check it at the door when we're looking to get intentional about fostering inclusivity, community, belonging, and mattering. Because that's exactly what we do at PeduL, right? And how we even audit opportunities for our student community. We're not giving companies room to kind of claim that we don't exist because diversity is not equivalent to underqualified or underskilled.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kayla said. Kayla, if there was a mic, this would be an appropriate time to drop it for you. I think that this whole notion of racism in the workplace is not addressed to the extent that it needs to be. But I do want to just first start off by acknowledging diversity and inclusion leaders and practitioners. They have really, really tough jobs. These are people who have all of the responsibility of solving these problems and none of the authority, zero authority.
Right.
So, you know, I talk to D&I leaders all the time, and I mean, just the stories they tell me are heartbreaking, just in terms of how tired and exhausted they are. I remember one person telling me sometimes she just wants to go home and roll up into a ball and cry. Another leader once told me, no matter what I do, everybody is mad at me. Everybody yells at me. You know, these are folks who are trying to, you know, do the right thing and advance diversity and inclusion, and they face resistance from people who are signing their paychecks. So that's just a really tough position to be in, and hats off to all the D&I leaders and practitioners on this call. Same thing in terms of D&I champions. There are some people who do not have D&I in their job responsibilities and always are stepping up for social justice. We've got people who are on the receiving end of harm, and then also we have allies. So shout out to those folks also. In terms of the prioritization, it really, you know, kind of goes back to what Kayla was saying in terms of the whole idea of really being honest about what's going on. I actually really am trying not to even use the words unconscious bias, because to tell you the truth, I really think of it as unconscious white supremacy. I think that it's really important to make the ability to lead without being influenced by white supremacy a basic leadership competency. So that's what I would love to see. I mean, you know, you can't cover up symptoms of, or you can cover up, I should say, symptoms of chronic illness with something little like an aspirin, but that's just symptoms. You can't solve chronic illness with an aspirin. Same thing goes when it comes to addressing racism and any other types of isms in the workplace. Sometimes you really need to just look at what the root cause is and address it. I'm really excited to read The Sum of Us because I think that will be very enlightening in terms of kind of the historical aspects that have contributed to the situation that we're in right now. I mean, when we think about it, our country is based on a system that has promoted race-based, gender-based, other types of laws designed to advance and advantage some people and marginalize and oppress others. I think that the workplace has to come to terms with how our country has been designed and developed and created to separate folks, and think about what that means in terms of the workforce and address these issues from that perspective. You know, it's not a thing of where you just look up one day and certain populations are underrepresented or certain populations are not paid equally. I mean, there's a reason for this. And until we get to that, I'm not as optimistic as I would like to be when it comes to advancing diversity and inclusion and equity, specifically equity in the workplace.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. That's okay. I agree 100% with both of you. As a white women leader, right? That's been a conversation that we have had to really be honest about. And I'll just talk about one of the kind of the systematic processes, Kayla, you talked about in hiring, right? So as a small firm, right, we're competing against very large companies. And so one of the things that a process that we used was referrals. And we're like, great, using referrals helps us move faster and helps us compete. But it also created a very homogeneous population. Yeah, you're on mute, but I think you're gonna finish you've got it, right? Right. And we looked up and we thought, we did this. And our Black team members were saying, Kathy, you did this. You were in charge of this, and this happened. And I was like, we were trying to move fast, trying to be competitive, but in the end, that process didn't serve us. And it's those networks that, get people jobs that perpetuates this problem. So when you look at your talent pipeline and your skills pipeline and in your process, you really have to open it up. And that means that you have to change and look not just at your talent processes, but your entire company's processes, because everywhere you turn, white supremacy is embedded in them, because that's what we are taught in our MBA programs. And that's what, corporate America has been entrenched in. So from a prioritization standpoint, both of you said, it's not a checkbox. It's not just like, oh, we did it and it's done. It is continual journey across all aspects of the business, your people, your process, your technology. It's making the time for it, right? And of course, the pace of change in business is so fast now. There's so much happening. And yet, one of my favorite quotes that I heard in my own journey, in my own learning, because that's been my investment to make, has been that inclusion and diversity is speed. Speed is the enemy of inclusion and diversity. Like, you can't, things that propel you to move faster, like this referral program that we had, aren't going to get you there. So you have to make the time, you have to make the budget, you have to have the leadership. It just pains me, Cynthia, the stories, and I've heard them myself too in my own conversations of, you're being paid to do a job, and then yet everyone's making it so much harder on you to enact change. So it has to be true leadership, investment, visible. You have to measure it and make it public. So there's about 100 priorities, and you can't pick one of them. You really have to invest in an end-to-end commitment.
So, I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the challenges I think that already Kayla, Kathy, and Cynthia brought up. I think that how employers can tackle is this first by creating a culture. Some of the things that stemmed up in last year, some of the things that I worked on was that we needed to create a culture, because getting to the point of like not having the checkbox of like, let's just, you know, create these initiatives, let's create these workshops, let's create these programs. It doesn't work that much, because I think that there is a lot of unlearning that needs to happen at the senior leadership when you're looking at these companies who have the decision-making roles and how they've been sort of conducting HR practices, you know. So when a task force for AT&T was formed, one of the things that we did take a deep dive was, how are we even providing the language of our job descriptions? Are we using inclusive language? You know, are we looking at incorporating things that can be embedded, which incorporates the values that we are trying to lead as a company? So, you know, I think that going back to what I had said earlier about leaders need to be becoming more present with having courageous, candid conversations where personal and professional stories need to be shared amongst all employees. You know, we started this thing called our listening tours, and that was able to get a deeper understanding of what's happening with employees and what can be created. So I think inclusion comes first before anything, where we can add in all the things that we want. So I think that was a big component of some of the strategies that we think can be helpful as we are pivoting into incorporating some of these as our values, and not just as things that are a checkbox that we need to fill out. It really needs to stem from the leadership. It needs to come from HR managers. It needs to come from you know, everyone as a community. And I think these things can only happen when they're on repeat and replay. I don't have another formula for this. Like, if it's not embedded on a weekly and a monthly basis, the gap, it keeps on getting larger. And so having the monthly continuity of something like this is going to start paving the way for the gap to start bridging a little bit. And so I'm hoping that as you know, to share more of some of the things that we are doing, but I won't discount some of the challenges that we have. And they're just, let me just tell you, changing mindsets and behavior changes is probably the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. You know, I know I'm about birthing a business was one thing, probably birthing a child will be another, but changing mindsets is, let's just say it's pretty deep, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can I just make one more point that I wanted to add, and that kind of goes back to the whole issue of intersectionality. And you know, I myself have different identities. You know, I identify first as Black, a woman. I have a disability. I just want to mention that, at least for me, in my experience as a Black woman, disabled woman, there is still issues of unconscious white supremacy in the disability community. When we think about gender diversity, what does that mean for Black, Latinx, Indigenous women, LGBTQ community? So I just wanted to point that out in terms of, for those of us who are doing work when it comes to racial equity, it's really important to remember that there might be people who have different identities who are not getting the support that they need when it comes to those other identities. And I think that it's just really, really important that we do what we can to try to be supportive of people of color across the board, and consider the intersecting identities that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Cynthia, your point brings us right back to one of my major takeaways from this, which is the intentionality that's required across the board as we have these conversations. And Saira, it's so funny. I used to say when I was in graduate school that I'm in the business of changing hearts and minds, and it is not an easy job. So I totally resonate with that as well. So it's clear that you all just have so much experience, you know, in this space. And obviously, you know, Kathy, I think as you sort of pointed out, that means that you have seen a lot of initiatives and partnerships, some which have been great and some which have maybe not necessarily yielded the outcomes that we were hoping for. So I was hoping that you all could just share a little bit about one successful project or partnership or pathway that you were a part of creating or that you witnessed, and the one attribute that you think really helped to make it especially successful.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So one of the opportunity gaps that I've been focusing on is actually for the 1/3 of the adult working population that doesn't have a bachelor's degree, right? There, Kayla, you talked about your friends that were dropping out of college, right? Like, PeduL is helping reduce that gap and create opportunities, post graduation but for those folks for one reason or another that don't have that bachelor's degree, it's like, how can we create more pathways there? And I developed a pilot program with one of our nonprofit partners called Opportunity Junction. They are an Antioch-based organization that was actually founded by our founder, Meryl Natchez. So we have a really deep connection with them. And it's a training program to start as helping women. It now serves a broader population, but create a pathway to professional and medical careers. So these may have been stay-at-home moms. These may have been folks that have been in the retail, and how do you create, meaningful long-term career opportunities. But we'd always been in partnership with Opportunity Junction, but I was finding that our clients were starting to let us know that, hey, you know what, we're going to outsource some of these jobs to overseas, and we're going to start a training program for folks overseas. Would you develop the training program to help this? And I was like, no, actually, we have really amazing people right here in our community, and I'm going to build that training program in partnership with Opportunity Junction. This was in the learning and development space and using technologies to create online learning platforms. And so we did a mini pilot to teach one of their graduates how to use this particular software and how to do this work for our clients in partnership with senior learning developers that often have degrees in education and adult learning. And that program was 4 years ago, and our apprentice and now full-time employee has been with us for almost 4 years and is now, in fact, a leader in our DIEB space as well. And so that was, a small program that we did. And now I've been learning what Accenture does, and they have large scale internship programs that they are now going to be launching. They've been doing in Chicago and other metropolitan areas, and they're launching a Northern California apprenticeship program to create more opportunities for those without college degrees to have support, have a supportive environment to learn new skills, to be mentored and partners, and close that opportunity gap because this need is so high. Kayla, you were talking about the cost of a college degree, and what studies are actually finding is that more employers are requiring college degrees for jobs that in the past did not require a college degree. And this is exacerbating the problem, right? So you have jobs that didn't used to require a college degree. Now they do, and now it's more expensive than ever. So we need to, stop that policy, hire for the opportunity, not the pedigree. And we need to create more of these pathways, and apprenticeship is one way to do that.
Absolutely. Kathy, we need to talk after this because we're gonna be friends, girl.
Love it.
I think most people, and maybe not most people, but a lot of people, they'll celebrate opportunities, right? But at PeduL, we really only celebrate and honor equal access to them, right? So the PeduL team, we wake up every day to not only assure that there's a democratization of access to higher education, but also to further bridge that gap between campus and career. So I find in our personal experience that our most powerful partnerships are born out of three things: intention, alignment, and radical candor. Probably uncomfortable candor, actually, sometimes on my end. When you're not willing to have the tough conversations, or you're not truly authentic in kind of your passion for creating community of belonging and mattering among an entire workforce, regardless of color, class, or creed, it's very hard to have those substantive conversations and discourse about how to move in the right direction, right? So I had an incredible experience with Viacom CBS that was supposed to just be a pilot, right? And like I said earlier, when they called us the #1 diversity hack, obviously that was because of a successful partnership. So they were only supposed to get 2 scholarship winners. But we added pressure, right? And we weren't afraid to say things to the talent team that many other founders who were just trying to land that big deal, that big logo, that they probably would have been afraid to say, especially someone from our background, right, with two under 30 something, Black founders, and me being a woman and my co-founder being a man. I know that there was a lot of times where, we could have held our tongue, but we just didn't. And we held strong in our, conviction behind what we do and our mission. And we encouraged them to kind of diversify the internship opportunities that were even available. And because of that, they ended up hiring about 20 of our students between entry-level positions and internship positions. And I actually, right before this call, before my sales call in this conference, I just got off the phone with one of our students who just found out that she was selected for, so makes it 2021 now, a summer production internship. And she's from a small liberal arts college of maybe 2,000 students in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. And you have to think about all of the students like that, right, who aren't going to coastal states, who are not the first college that a lot of these talent managers are going to for a variety of reasons, from bandwidth to resources. And so because of that, right, they are rarely getting FaceTime with major corporations. And if it wasn't for the PeduL experience, maybe they would have never gotten that opportunity. So I really believe true intention behind, the team's efforts played a really significant role. And it does give me some hope.
So I want to say two, I think, the areas that worked really well, and I'll start with the large one, and I'll go to the mini one. So some of the things that that worked well in the pathways, or the ways and how we could kind of create and shuffle some change for this, since actualization is a part of the conference theme, is that what I realized is that how do we get, how did, I think, wait, I made actually a quick note about this. How can we start with one small thing that happens at a cultural level, and then what can happen, going back to what all three of you had mentioned on the collaboration with HR. So I'll speak regarding the bigger one. So I agree that HR is definitely it's like where everything funnels in. So getting the training, getting them abreast with everything that's happening with 21st century type of recruiting is extremely essential for them to incorporate when they funnel in different diverse backgrounds. And that was something that was really, really important for us, especially with the language of making sure that we aren't, discounting any sort of things that we've done in the past. And again, it's about unlearning ways on how we have put job descriptions out, and then incorporating some of the new ways and new practices, being very sensitive for things and including that. So that was one little step. And then also one of the things that our, I think our California office did was that I started a theme called Wellness Wednesday or Wisdom Wednesday. And so this concept of wellness and Wisdom Wednesday was for everyone to come together and to be able to talk about their personal stories during lunch. And even though this was really like a very simple gesture of getting everyone together, it allowed for more candid conversations from leadership. It allowed it to have more stories to be shared amongst individuals so that they can talk about all of their diverse stories. And that way it allowed for the movement for more inclusivity in these type of environments that allow for things to start moving in a progression of expanding on D&I practices overall. I think the storytelling is so critical and important, because corporations from a leadership perspective, it starts from modeling from their behaviors and from their values, and that how it translates and cascades into managers and then direct reports. And I think it's just one of the prerequisites for this formula to work really well. So that's something that we did on our end.
And so I'll just quickly talk about diversity advocates, which I am a part of at the Kapor Center. So that was an initiative that was actually started by Frida Kapor Klein and a group of other people leading D&I in their tech companies to really help come together and share best practices and pose questions to one another. You can go to diversityadvocates.com if you're interested in showing up. But the benefit of that community is really the ability to learn from from one another so people can find out what other people have been doing within their organizations, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And then for me, it's been incredibly helpful because it gives me almost like a window into what's happening at these different tech companies. So, I've shared a few kind of moments with you, but I've got to tell you the stories and the insights that I'm privy to. It's just really heartbreaking, but it also gives me the insight that I need so that as I develop education tools, webinars, we're working on a curriculum now for D&I leaders. It gives me the insights needed to be able to actually meet the needs of folks who are doing the hard work.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that we had this time to sort of share that, because I think for me, it's so great to hear how you guys have found successes in these spaces through different projects, through different initiatives, but then to also hear, again, the intentionality and the courage and the things that you all had to do in order to achieve this success. And I think that's a, really important message for, for me, and I think all of our attendees to be able to hear. So time is flying by this afternoon, but we do have about 15 minutes left, and I want to leave a little bit of time for a few questions that I've seen come through the chat and then in the Q&A panel at the end. But for our last question, this conference, is all about actualizing the future that we want, right? And so to help us all determine next steps and just, where we want to go from here, if the people listening to our panel today could take 10 minutes out of the rest of their day to execute on an idea that will help them move the needle forward, what would you all suggest they spend that 10 minutes doing? Your brief, it's only 10 minutes. So, your brief call to action for our attendees watching today.
So in other words, don't take 10 minutes to answer the question.
Well, we want to actualize effectively.
So just very briefly, this is what my dream would be. I would love for them to email their CEOs and advocate that the CEO protect DE&I, because the equity is so important, efforts in their organization, for them to do this by requiring that anyone interviewing for a position in leadership or management, that they be able to demonstrate their competencies when it comes to leading through an inclusive lens. And then if they're not able to do that, only offer contingency offers that are conditional on the fact that they develop these skills. So my question is, if you can't get somebody who's going to be leading people to agree to one of the, or to agree to the latter, if they can't demonstrate their competencies, what does that mean in terms of how, how they're going to impact your DE&I efforts? And then the other thing, because it's a quick email, so we'll have time for this in the 10 minutes when they compose this, they ask their leaders to allow bonuses to be tied to leaders' efforts as they create inclusive and equitable environments based on input from D&I leaders and employee group, resource group members.
Love it. Yes. Yes, and if you are one, I'll add, if you're one of those leaders that is making a hiring decision today or a promotion decision today, or making any of those decisions, pause, slow it down, back it up, look at your candidate pool, look at your promotion pool. Have you gotten real meaningful feedback? Check your biases. Is it not just the squeaky voice? Is it not just the referral? Like, really deeply think about who you are talking to, who you're giving that promotion to, and have you really evaluated everyone in your company for that. Even if you're going to miss the deadline for whatever deadline you have, make a case that you need to be, very, very thoughtful about it. So that would be my add-on there briefly.
Okay, I'll go really quickly since Kayla is not going to say anything. If there were two things that that what employers can do, one thing I know for sure is that when employers are hiring, I want to make sure that they're having a diverse panel who is interviewing them. It's so important that there are different identities and people's life experiences that who are in the room, who are interviewing, that they are different and they're unique and they represent their values of the company if they have D&I incorporated in there. I have a huge problem with that. So that's something I'm working on. And then the second thing is that going and doing something small. I think that we all have it within us. We're at a conference where we're like social change agents. I believe that each one of us who is at this conference is wanting to disrupt it in a way that gets us back into equilibrium. Okay, so one thing, whether it is having a book club, which starts off with a conversation with a book that is uncomfortable, but get different people in that book club. Start something like that, even if you're in an organization. And with your one-on-ones with your boss, start talking about personal stories and normalizing things that you experience. Because the more that we talk and elevate voices in a way with vulnerability and with authenticity, we're creating space for the conversations for D&I to happen organically. And so when we do that, it's not about, oh my God, does this need to be a discussion? Oh wait, no, this is embedded in our values. And I think it's just, there's more sweet than salt in it. So I'll end with that.
Yes. And just to speak to, I guess, the humanity of the people watching this, regardless of whether you're a student or you're in talent or if you're, you know, a leader or whatever, right? I think it's just getting honest with yourself and being willing and open to have conversations with yourself, right? Like this book, or I was just finished this book, called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talks about identity, to Sarah's point early, right? And how we don't, you don't want to say, I'm going to try to read tomorrow, or I'm going to try to be a reader. If you're a reader, I am a reader. Claim that, right? I am a reader because I spend 5 minutes a day, 2 minutes a day, 3 minutes a day reading, listening to Audible, whatever. I am a reader. And so I'm claiming that identity and my behaviors are casting votes, right? Positive votes for that behavior, that identity. So when we're talking about this subject in particularly, how do we stop ourselves from doing business as usual? How we operate in our daily lives, right? How do we come to conversations with our authentic self? And I think I'm ignorant to the fear of kind of being candid with someone who has the power over your next paycheck, right? So I'm not saying, maybe go to your boss if you know that he's racist and he's not willing to have the conversation, but maybe you have a conversation with that girl who gave you a microaggression last month and just talk to her, or try to open and extend an olive branch to have an honest conversation about how that made you uncomfortable. I remember interning at Goldman Sachs, and one of the first things that I got asked my first day of work was, what school do you go to? In the back of my mind, doing sales my entire life, I'm always asking myself, what's the real question? And the real question was, how am I supposed to respect you, essentially? He was kind of pedigree checking. So, it's those kind of uncomfortable conversations that I even had to have in my exit interview with Goldman, saying, hey, I don't feel comfortable being here. And this is why. And hopefully you're open and honest with yourself to be able to acknowledge that made me feel uncomfortable, and probably will make someone else feel uncomfortable who isn't from the typical MIT, Stanford, Ivy League background that you typically are getting, right? So I feel like just spending some time with yourself to be introspective will go a long way, because I feel like we don't do it enough, and people get to 70 years old and wonder why, people are not investing in loving on them, because they just haven't taken time to think about people other than themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of this was amazing advice, stopping business as usual, making sure that we're figuring out ways to hold our leaders and CEOs accountable, having diverse interview panels. All of these, I think, are amazing pieces of advice. And so thank you guys so much for sharing. We are almost coming up on time, because I did want to take a couple questions. We had one question come in pretty early on. And so I did want to just see if anyone had something to add to this. The question was, along with skill building, we need to address data collection of Black and Brown communities. So it's thinking about data collection and how we are analyzing these things. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just point out particularly how these data are being analyzed. I really think that it is important for us to have people of color, Black, Latinx, Indigenous folks at the table during the analysis process when we're talking about data and people of color.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? Thank you. And then just quickly, we did have another question come in specifically about a specific for a model for diversifying the hiring of nurses or in hospital units, anything that specifically helps break down white supremacist healthcare hospital hiring practices. I do think that some of the tips shared here, even though we were talking specifically about like technology and workforce development, that can be applied there. But I wanted to, of course, ask the question just in case you all had any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so that's outside of my area of expertise, but what I would say, I'm sure that there are nursing organizations. I would say look to those professional organizations, see what they're doing, and if they're not doing much, express the need to see if they would be responsive.
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's one of my big takeaways from this conversation for sure is, you know, the role that we have to play as individuals in asking for and making sure we're advocating for the things that we need in these spaces. Because I think there's things have to happen on both sides in order for us to somewhere meet in the middle of somewhere that's going to be successful. So with that, I of course want to ask, do our panelists have any closing thoughts for our attendees today?
I would just, again, kind of close with how I started and thank everybody who's doing the hard work to create more inclusive and equitable and diverse environments. I know that can be difficult and challenging to speak up, particularly when you are doing it against or doing it toward folks who have authority over you. So we appreciate your courage and your willingness to speak up. And I think that it's speaking up is just really critical. There's no way that we are going to be able to make progress unless we use our voices.
And I just want to thank everyone who took the time to be here today. Obviously, there's a desire to have this conversation. And I think, you know, from my perspective, my generation, just being open to discourse is the first step. So to Cynthia's point, just, you know, thank you for being here. Thank you for being open and opening up your hearts to something like this.
Make those brave spaces, be brave in those spaces, and learn and listen.
Yeah.
You've got to get at it.
Absolutely. And I think we may have lost Saira along the way, but I'm sure she also would have had some amazing closing words of wisdom. I thank you so much to our panelists for your insightful thoughts today. It's truly been invaluable. Thank you to the conference organizers for allowing us to hold this space, and of course to everyone who attended this session. Next on the schedule, we do have a session on impact investment and social profit organizations. So we encourage you to check those out. And please, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your conference. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Great job of moderating. Thank you. Oh, we just dropped off.
Yes, we miss you. We miss you there right at the end.
Sorry, so I'm right now in Pakistan, and so I may have had like a spotty connection for like a hot minute, but it was so wonderful having this synchronization of our stories, and Cheyenne, great job with moderating, and I loved just our synchronization of our different paths and stories with Cynthia and Kathy, as well as I think Kayla, she left.
Yes, well, no, I'm glad you were able to make it through almost there to the end. So you were there for the whole time. And so thank you so much. And thank you guys both. It's easy to moderate when you have great speakers and panelists. So thank you guys for all of that. This is definitely my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. I learn all the time and really hope that we can connect and continue to learn from each other and expand our network. So thank you so much for all your insights.
For sure. Thank you guys so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.